The voice of the 76ers for almost 3 decades, Marc Zumoff, joins the show. Marc, how you doing today?
Almost 3 decades. Hard to believe, Harry.
What an amazing journey that you have had. Tell us, what's the what are you doing post on air right now with yourself?
I am teaching at Temple University. I am also the Associate Director of the Claire Smith Center for Sports Media at the university. I do a fair amount of philanthropic work. I help to coach young people if they're interested in breaking into the business or improving their skills. I got a lot going on, guys. Don't be misled. Retirement is just a word.
It doesn't sound like retirement.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like you have much downtime in that retirement. You know, the teaching and the coaching kind of fascinates me. You have so much to impart on people. Talk to us about that and what it means to you to be able to take the things that you've learned through the years that other people taught you, pass it down to people who will be able to use it to entertain others.
I'd like to think that I'm doing a service for young people because a lot of what I learned through the years was making stupid mistakes or just not listening myself or just discovering things because it's part of the natural growth process. So for me, to be able to perhaps give them some aha moments or have them avoid some of those pitfalls and they get it and they improve their performance or they're able to get a job through career development skills or what have you is very, very rewarding for me.
You know, Marc, we know you mostly from the Sixers and all those amazing catchphrases that you came up with over the years, but we all needed to start with a big break. Back in 1980, you had a one-game audition with the Philadelphia Fever. What was it like to have that audition? What do you remember about that audition? And by the way, who was the guy that you did the audition with?
So I'll save the best for last or close to last, but it was an opportunity for me to have a one-game audition. The Philadelphia Fever was an indoor soccer team, and I did their games their last 2 years, 78 through 80. And indeed, I had not had any sportscasting experience on TV, so a gentleman by the name of V. Shubin, who was the program director of Channel 17, seeing that I was green, said, all right, you have a one-game audition. If you pass, you have the contract to do the games for the rest of the season. And if not, then we're going to have to do something else. And so I remember distinctly the team opened the season in Hartford, Connecticut. And, I'd done all my homework and was understandably very nervous knowing that all this pressure is going to be put on me. And then I remember that morning I woke up, it was a Sunday morning, the team was playing an afternoon game. And I got a call from this Mr. Shubin who had said to me, listen, your color analyst, who was as green as I was, a gentleman by the name of Skip Roderick, had never done TV before either. And he said, well, he can't make the game. And to this day, I think they didn't want to have two beginners on at the same time. So he said, your color analyst, and he's flying there now, is going to be Harry Kalas. And of course, we all know that Harry's a Hall of Fame broadcaster and is one of the greatest to ever talk about baseball with a microphone in his hands. And so it needs to be understood that he really didn't know that much about indoor soccer, but he was so good at being a broadcaster that he could be on television talking about anything. Just with that great bass voice that he had, you clearly felt like he knew what he was talking about. And so I think he was brought in just to make sure that I didn't, faint on the air or anything like that. He was my color analyst. I did the game. Needless to say, I passed the audition. And the final year of that team, I should point out, for the old timers, they had their games on the old Prism TV, which is the forerunner to Comcast Sportsnet, which became NBC Sports Philadelphia. And of course, they did Flyers games and Phillies games. And they did Sixers basketball. And through that, they hired me to be the halftime host. My first year was the championship year, 82-83, and then in 94 I got the job announcing the games.
So when you find out that Harry Kalas is flying in to do your game with you, how do you deal with that as a young announcer, and how do you impart that same wisdom on? Because you may not, maybe you do realize it, but you should know that if you were to do that with a young announcer today, they'd feel the same way.
I think they'd be even more nervous because there you're sitting next to someone who I grew up listening to. You know, Harry came to Philly in the early 70s. I was still in high school and just became enamored with him, his voice, his style, all of that. And so to be sitting next to someone like that, we'll say 7, 8 years later, was pretty mind-blowing for me. But somehow I got through it. We became friends after that. Not so much going out to dinner friends, but colleagues, as we all are in the sports media world. We all kind of know each other in Philadelphia and elsewhere. And so I enjoyed the association and was particularly touched by the fact that he had good things to say after my one-game audition and was always very complimentary from that point forward.
You know, you mentioned Prism. I still have a T-shirt with the Prism logo on it, and I get more comments wearing that shirt when I'm out walking around the city and in South Jersey than any other shirt I wear. So that station lives
How about
on.
that?
Oh, it's still I loved watching. That's where I learned.
I hope he washes it.
I do wash it, but that's where I learned watching my sports. You know, you've had some journey from.
Well, let me interrupt you for a second
Sure.
and ask this question of you. Do you know PRISM? Do you know what that stands for?
Oh, it's the something regional.
There you go. You're on it.
I'm drawing a blank. He asked me that on the air, but I did know that at one time.
Jason doesn't like to be quizzed.
No, I fail every quiz that Jeff asks me on the air live. So what does it stand for?
Yeah, so the great Lou Scheinfeld, who was we'll call him one of the primary people who worked with the late Ed Snyder, Flyers and the Sixers and the old Spectrum, came up with that. I think they came up with the name Prism first because I think, as Lou explains it, the old Spectrum had a logo that had almost rainbow-like colors in it. So Prism became almost like a natural offshoot. And then from that, Lou said, okay, PRISM, Philadelphia Regional In-Home Sports and Movies.
I had the regional part. But if you could have given me our whole interview and I wouldn't have gotten the rest
You're
of
one
it.
for
So I'll
five.
freely admit that. I would have not have passed the test in your class.
Listen, you got regional. That's more than 99 out of 100 would have got.
But he didn't get Philadelphia.
No. Well, the details, Jeff. You know, you mentioned, though, the Lou Scheinfeld, and I mean, we've had him on to talk before, the Flyers. You've called games for the Flyers, for the Union. You called U.S. women's basketball game over at the Rio Olympics. What's this journey been like for you? Could you ever have imagined in your 44-year career in broadcasting that you've had so many different stops along the road?
I'll say this, that while I was doing it, I would say to people, you know what, I'm going to be 95 years old and, sitting in a chair in some nursing home, and somebody's going to come up to you and say, you announced the games for the team you grew up rooting for, the 76ers, and you filled in for one of your idols, Gene Hart, doing Flyers, and you covered the Olympics one year. You actually did all of that, and I'll say, no way. There's no way that happened. So I didn't believe it while it was happening, and now that I'm not doing it anymore, it really does seem incredible because, I was a late bloomer. I wasn't one of those popular kids in class. I wasn't one of those who was picked to succeed. I kind of figured it out a lot later in life. In fact, there was a point in my life when I was graduating college, I didn't even think I was going to go into the business because my parents were, especially my mother, was afraid that I wouldn't have any security, that it was very competitive, and just the very notion of wanting to talk on the radio or be on TV was crazy in a modest household in which I grew up in Northeast Philly. And so to know that it all happened, what I try to do, guys, is I try to say to kids who don't have a lot of confidence or who never were able to think that they could be successful at anything, to tell them that it is possible. And what you need to do is you need to believe in yourself. And the way you believe in yourself is to begin to look back in your successes and generate more successes and gain confidence that way.
A lot of people who go into the profession that you do bounce around a lot, go to different cities. What has it meant to you to be able to be the kid from Northeast Philly who gets to announce his hometown team?
It's absolutely surreal for the exact reason that you just said. The higher you go in our business, the fewer the plum positions. So there are roughly 30 English-speaking TV play-by-play announcers because there's 30 teams in the NBA. And so when you think about all of the people who do work in smaller markets or minor league baseball or, small college basketball or streaming this or little league that. And then as you go higher, there are fewer and fewer positions. No matter how good you are, there are people who are going to get left by the wayside because there just aren't enough positions. So those odds are long to begin with, let alone have the opportunity, as I said earlier, to do the games for the team you grew up rooting for.
So now you get to sit home and watch the Sixers. Do you sit there and are you able to watch it quietly, or are you sitting next to someone and they're saying maybe, "Hey, Dad, by the way, you don't have to talk about the game. You could just watch it"?
Well, let me say this, guys. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I don't watch as often as people might think, because for me, this was a vocation, and it's something that I did for 40-some years. And so because of that, I have felt compelled. In fact, one of the reasons why I retired is so I could pursue and make time for other things. That would be including my wife, who, sat with our kids, had her own high-profile career, and nights, weekends, holidays didn't have me around. And so when I'm home with her, we can watch the Sixers or we can watch Grey's Anatomy. I don't want to sit there and let her watch Grey's Anatomy alone while I'm upstairs, agonizing over the Sixers. And so, I put the Sixers aside. Sometimes I'll tape the game, and sometimes I may not watch at all. So I don't spend a ton of time watching the Sixers, but when I have an opportunity or my wife doesn't mind or she's off somewhere, I'll sit back and I'll watch Kate Scott, who, by the way, I think is absolutely remarkable. She's excellent.
How often, it's got to be hard to replace the voice that was there, but I got to ask, you mentioned being with your wife. How often are you out and somebody's like, can you record saying like turn garbage into gold or coming in for a landing or any of your sayings? How often do you get people saying, can you record this for my wedding or for my voicemail or something? I imagine that happens occasionally for you.
I actually get it all the time, and a lot of what I do for charities involves a package where people can get a personalized video or an answering machine message or something like that. I'm on Cameo, so I get to earn a little bit of money doing that as well. And there are quite a number of people, and it's really astounding. You don't realize the power of TV until you're out on the street and people start coming back with phrases or, other things that they enjoyed. So it feels good. I can't lie to you. It feels good to know that people remember you, that you had a significant impact on their life, and that for some very important moments involving the Sixers, you were the soundtrack for it. It was a real honor to have done that.
We talk to athletes all the time about how they use their platform to benefit society. You just talked about doing charity work. How important and how much has it meant to you that you have been able to turn that platform into something that you can benefit your community with?
Well, I think everyone should give back. And if you have that platform, if you're a player or you're a movie star or a media personality, or in my case, someone who was on the air for 40 plus years in a big market, and you can parlay that into good for a nonprofit, well, then I really do think it's your responsibility to do so. I think those of us who are blessed to do something that we would have done for free and to be richly compensated for it owe even more, because we really didn't work for a living. We were just lucky enough to do something that we did as a kid. I used to turn the sound down to the TV and do games into a tape recorder, and the very essence of that was what I did for a living for 40 plus years. And so I think that everybody hopefully should feel some responsibility to give back, but those of us who have been fortunate to do what I did and the like should, I think, be even more inspired.
Through your years, whether you're doing pre and post game, halftime, calling the games, you have seen some pretty amazing basketball players, from Michael Jordan and Charles Barkley, their matchups at the Spectrum, to Allen Iverson, Joel Embiid through the years. What's it been like for you to have such a close seat to the greatness that is on the court and then be the soundtrack for what they do?
being a fan and then getting to be the soundtrack, it just makes it that much more special. I never got jaded, not once, not even up to the very last call that I made, because every time I walked into the arena, even before the players hit the floor, just seeing the seats, seeing the scoreboard, seeing the hardwood, hearing the public address announcer warm up, and then the first bounce of the basketball when players would come out to warm up, you got excited, even if it was the 81st of 82 games, or even if it was the fourth game at 5 nights. And I mean, think about it. Allen Iverson was one of the most unique players, not only in Philadelphia sports history, but in all of sports history, because he did what he did as a guy playing with giants, 6 feet, maybe 165 pounds, maybe, and not just shooting 25 footers, but going into the lane time and time again, getting bumped around, getting pushed down, popping back up. And I would have to say, as I think back on my career, probably my favorite guy in terms of calling the action, because he was so special, because he was so unique. And don't forget, the personality and everything else that happened with his hip hop style and dress, and how much of a pioneer he was with that. It was really just an unbelievable thing to be able to cover somebody like that.
Of all the games that you called, I know it's going to be hard, but what are the ones that you'll remember most?
It's weird, but I always say my favorite game ever. I started doing the games in 94, 95, and those were the first 2 years. It was John Lucas, and then Johnny Davis came along. And these were some lean years when the team was not doing very well. And then Pat Croce finally hired Larry Brown. And in a couple of years, Larry Brown came to realize that the way to succeed with Allen Iverson is to surround him with players who were good defensive players, who were hard workers and didn't necessarily need the ball, because Iverson was going to dominate the ball, especially, taking 30, 40 shots a game sometimes. And so when the team finally made the playoffs after an 8-year drought, you got to remember this was 98, 99. It was the lockout season. They played only 50 games, 5-0. So it was a sprint to the finish. And then I remember the Sixers were a 6 seed in the playoffs. Orlando was a 3 seed. They managed to split in Orlando. And the first home playoff game ever at Wells Fargo Center was also the first home playoff game for the Sixers in 8 years. And to this day, I remember Iverson he was out of his mind. In fact, he still has an NBA record. He had 10 steals in the game. If you get 3 or 4 steals in a game, it's a lot. So he had 10 in a playoff game, and it was just a wild affair. I don't think anybody sat down from tip-off to buzzer. There was a near fight in the game. I remember Matt Geiger tussling in front of the Orlando bench with the late Chuck Daly almost getting into it. So for some reason, with all the different games that I've covered over the years, that to me was the most special. And you have to remember, too, that I never did any of the finals games. So in 2001, when they made it, by then the networks had all the games.
Well, look, we can't thank you enough, me in particular, for being the voice of my childhood watching and growing up, and my adulthood watching this team, and for the rest of the fans that got to have you narrate what was our fandom, and for giving us some time here on the show to talk about all of it. Best of luck with all the stuff you're doing going forward, and we hope to help be able to publicize a little more.
Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed it.